So welcome everyone. I'm sorry I didn't come down earlier today. I still feel bad about 4th grade with Mr. Berger. So I still try to avoid him when I can. But welcome. We're so glad to have so many of you here again. This is the 2nd year that we've done This Is My Story, and I'll make my appeal again. All of you have a story. We want to hear it. It's been about a year ago, right, that we did it. It was shortly after last year that I ended up running into Tim. I said, Tim, would you please do this? Well, I'll think about it. I'll think about what story. You know, again, all of you have a story within you, and we're happy to have Tim Meyer. I don't think I need to introduce him. I mean, he's got half of his relatives here, and everybody else knows him. So I'd like to have Tim and Pam give their little talk, and I'm just going to sit over here and be quiet. But time is unlimited, so we're already way off schedule. So whatever you want to say, Tim, is wonderful. So here we go.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to try to talk pretty loud. I don't normally speak loudly unless I'm yelling at somebody. I thought, is RC still here? I thought that was really interesting. It's funny how the last couple of years when I've come through Amana, I come through Amana a lot, and I walk a lot down here, and I bike a lot, but I've just, I think it's my age, I'm just a lot more interested in the Amana history. When I start thinking, when I go through town and I think, you know, it really wasn't that many years ago, 90-some years ago, it was communal. And it must be my age. I don't know if anybody else has that same. I think it's just a natural progression of your life. You kind of start thinking about your ancestors, and 2 generations back, a completely different life. I mean, I just find myself thinking about that, so that was really interesting. And I remember this as a Sunday school. Shirley and I were talking about that, and my dad taught here for quite a while, Sunday school. But we're going to talk about, most of this is going to be about my dad, because I think he's got a lot more interesting story than I do. And Pam's going to help me a lot, because she's obviously known our family a long time, and she maybe looks at it from a little different perspective than I do, which I think that will be interesting. But we've got some notes here, and Rebecca's helped us with a PowerPoint, so we'll kind of get started here. These are my grandfather and my grandmother, and I didn't know my grandfather at all because he died when he was 39 years old. It's Fred Meyer and May Meyer. Now, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. And I have this is my dad, Henry's mother, May, and they were married, I think, in 20-something. He was born in 1898, she was born in 1901. She was widowed very early. He died when he was 39. So she's raising the 3 kids, Louise, Meyer, I think we've got a next slide here maybe. The 3 siblings, I think, are next. Isn't that a cool picture? You've got Peggy and Les's mother, Louise, on the left, Henry in the middle, and Harold at the right. But, you know, think about back to, you know, this was right after, so this would have been 1939 when she was widowed. And after the Great Change, the Depression, all that stuff, and she was working for 10 cents an hour. I remember this story at the woolen mill, raising 3 kids. I mean, she was an incredible, my grandmother was an incredible person to have the success of these 3 kids, you know, and that's kind of a neat picture. I don't know where that came from. Does anybody have any idea where that airplane came from?
And we have the hat at home that he's wearing, and one of the old pictures I found, he and Harold were wearing these leather aviator. Yeah. And he was, that's obviously the side of the house in Amana with the,
So this is post-communal Amana, and Harold ended up going into the Air Force and settling in Beaumont, Texas. He worked for Mobil Oil for a long time, very successfully, and go to Beaumont to visit every once in a while, but, we'll just keep moving here, I guess, so. This, of course, is the family home in Amana. I think it was 7 generations, it's 6 or 7 generations of the same family lived in the same home, which, I don't know if that's a record, but and there's probably quite a bit of that in Amana, I suppose. But obviously have a lot of stories about that home. And I grew up with 2 grandmothers, 2 widowed grandmothers in my home, and my mom was a beautician. My dad, of course, was working in Amana, and I just have great memories of the 2 grandmothers, spending time with them, and that was before daycare and all that stuff. But Pam, you have anything to add on any of this?
Well, I was asking you, when your parents were, your dad was young, who, if he knew who lived upstairs? Because, you know, obviously Tim doesn't know that, or anybody.
Before the grandmothers were there, or?
Yeah, when Henry was young. I mean, Henry grew up here, that would be a.
I just remember Oma May, the picture we saw upstairs in that part of the house over here, and Emma Oma was on the other side of the house.
So that was Mai's mother?
No? What's Peggy, you know all this stuff. Emma Oma was the other side
Yeah.
of the family, which.
Good Oma was in South Amana.
Oh,
Lived at George's house.
okay. Summer?
Pardon?
Summer, was it Summer?
Yes, summer.
That was her maiden name.
So what year is this picture roughly, Tim?
I really don't know, John.
You think it's 50s or 60s or?
Yeah.
Before the grape arbor got on this house at that time.
Yeah, the shutters.
Of course, for those if you don't know, that home is the hotel now, or the guest house. Less and less bought it from our family and made it into. Did you call it the guest house then? Okay, it's still
So what year did that door get put in the front? Do you remember? Or Les, do you know?
when the hotel probably got.
Yeah,
Did you do that?
on the door on the back side.
Yeah.
Backside.
Well,
This side.
yeah,
There's
the
a
front,
door
you
there
know,
now.
where we had to put in the exit door.
Oh,
Here
yeah.
we bought it.
Was?
It was there when you bought it?
Yep.
I don't remember that.
I remember Mom saying that when everybody changed houses, Oma and Opa got the house where they lived up there on top of the hill, and then one of the families that lived in that house got moved, and they moved into this house, and whoever was living in that house got moved into another house, and Mom said it took all day long with the horse and buggy to get everybody moved from one place to another. I don't know who was living in the house where Oma and Papa lived that moved into your house, or to this house. That was way back.
Okay, so back there, I guess we'll
Yeah.
keep moving, but, kind of a neat picture of my dad. I don't know how old he would have been, but he always liked baseball. And I think that might have been a high school baseball picture.
No, that was softball.
Oh, that's
Softball, West
softball.
Amana.
Okay, so,
So who's in the picture with Henry?
you know who's in the picture there, RC?
Yeah, it's Russell Lance, your dad, and myself.
That's you.
I'm on the right.
A couple of years ago. So vintage wise, this would have been
1950.
1960.
50.
50, yeah, okay.
When I was looking
Pam
for,
was commenting about, man, my dad's arms were long.
I could always find Henry in those baseball pictures, because he was a catcher, I think, at times. He'd throw that
That's his
ball,
first baseman's mitt though.
and he'd be halfway, you know, the pitcher. You know, it's unbelievable arms.
But he actually played on the freezer team,
Yeah.
which I only heard about, but
Your dad was our scoutmaster for a period of time.
okay. But didn't the freezer team finish like second in the state?
Oh, yeah, I didn't play for, I was too young.
But they, on the freezer team, that was like a industrial team. They had Jack Dittmer, I've just heard these stories. He played in the major leagues. And we had M. Tennell, who was played
Under,
football at Iowa, who ended up in the NFL. So they had two major league athletes on that team, and Pam said, no wonder they had a good team. So,
George hired a lot of,
yeah, I imagine he did. Rebecca, we'll keep moving here a little bit. Graduation picture of Henry in front of the, now where is that, Pam?
That's your house.
Is it at the house? Okay. I thought the picture on the right was kind of neat. It said something about Peterson Field. So Peterson Field must have been where Harold was in the service. Because I can't relate anything else to Peterson Field. Does anybody know where Peterson Field is?
Colorado.
Colorado?
I think that's where he was stationed.
But I just have so much respect for my grandmother, the way she raised that family with all the adversity that got thrown at those people. I mean, it's just like, this is like 2 generations back. It's just kind of amazing to me the way everybody turned out in that family.
Well, I think the time frame of this is interesting because Henry graduated in May of
45.
45, went right into the military in June, and was sent to Alabama, and was married shortly after that. So like in 4 months, you know, he left from his family home to a whole different life. Things
Talk
move
about
fast.
growing up quickly. You graduate from high school in May, you get drafted or whatever it was in June or July, you go to basic training, he went through infantry training, he was being really prepared. The war was still going on. He was being trained like a lot of other young men to invade Japan, and if the atomic bomb wouldn't have been dropped, he probably would have been on that first invasion, and how many of them would have been killed?
first and last.
First and last, you know, it's kind of.
And with basically German language background, going into an English army, all speaking English. I remember Bill Zuber talking about that with the baseball, how hard it was to speak English all the time. People didn't understand you. Yeah, I mean, I think it was so hard to go in the service.
One other thing that we were going to talk about my dad in this period of time was he drove a bread truck while he was in high school. Before classes, he arranged it so and I think he did it for 2 years. His classes were all in the afternoon, and this was when the war was going on, and I guess it was financial need or whatever. But he would go to the bakery like 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, load up the
Bakery in South?
in Upper South.
Yeah.
And he lived in Amana here, and load up the bread truck, drive to Iowa City and North Liberty and Cedar Rapids, and be back at 10 or 11 o'clock, and then go to school.
Wow. Wow.
I've led such a sheltered life. I mean, seriously, you just think back to what these people went through. It's just incredible. So that's interesting to me. And then we've got a marriage picture here too, I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
It was October 25th of 1945, and they're living in a chicken coop in Anniston, Alabama.
Oh my God.
Wow.
It's funny because Pam's folks were in the military and they lived in a chicken coop.
are you serious? A real
Where
chicken?
did the chickens go?
We need eggs.
We need more chicken.
I think Mildred was working during that time.
I think she was doing hair in Alabama. And Anniston, Alabama is east of Birmingham, about an hour or 2. I've looked it up here just recently. It's kind of a different racial component than Iowa. obviously, the Deep South. And I remember one story Mom told too about Oma May going down to visit them, and she got on a bus and rode all the way to Birmingham, Alabama. My mom was there to meet her at the station, and
Well, I think she sewed a little purse, a little pouch
that's right.
into her dress so that, she wouldn't lose the money and the things that she needed, so she sewed this little pouch into her dress. And Henry was staff sergeant in a very short time, so I
It was
showed a
in
lot
less
of.
than 18 months, and he was a staff sergeant, which is
So then he, after the war ended, then, like, after they were married, just right after, in 45.
46.
Yeah, the next slide we're gonna go to is, we're gonna start his Amana career, which I think is maybe the more interesting, one of the interesting parts about my dad. So Rebecca, I think we got the next slide. Okay, well, he came back, he got out of the service in September of 1946. My sister Cindy was born September 2nd, 1946. So here he is out of the military, just had a baby girl, doesn't have a job. He wants to enroll at Iowa, but he was about 2 weeks late because Iowa had started in early September, and this is like late September or whatever. So he heard that George Forstner was hiring at Amana, and so he started his career at Amana. And he was a clerk, some sort of a clerk, I'm not sure. I always thought it was like taking inventory in the factory, but anyway, he started his career there, and in less than a month, George Forstner asked him to be a buyer. But my dad's intent was to work for a few months and then start Iowa in January, second semester. But he ended up staying 45 years to the day.
Wow.
So he had a 45-year career there. And we'll talk a little bit about that because, it's kind of interesting how he kind of progressed through Amana. It turned out to be a pretty good career. But I think the next slide is maybe about some of the things that were happening in Amana. My father started in purchasing, and then he worked his way up to vice president of purchasing, and Raytheon bought Amana in 1965, and that's kind of where Henry's career kind of took off. But this is an article while my dad was CEO. He was CEO from 1982 to the day that he retired in October of 91. And I got to talk to my dad quite a bit about, you think of a CEO's job being pretty easy sometimes, and he had a lot of adversity thrown at him in his career. The appliance business is like a lot of things, it's a really challenging business, and they went through a lot of transitional periods of time, but one of them was prior to my dad getting the CEO job, they were really building up the radar range business, and the radar range business, Raytheon that had purchased them had the technology to do the microwaves from some of their military experience, and they were really riding the wave of the microwave, and but they realized that because of the foreign competition, the Japanese were getting into the microwave business and a lot of other people, that they really had kind of a pivot point in the history of Amana. If they didn't change from that position, they were going to have some problems. So they really started going more into the refrigerator and I think they call it white goods or whatever they called it. And that was kind of a key decision my dad had to make. I heard him talk about one of the really tough decisions he had to make at Amana for the survival of that company because there was so much infrastructure and history, not to change the radar range thing and keep writing that, but I think it was kind of an important thing. That's what that article's about a lot, and then just the transition at that point in my dad's career. And then I think the next article, Rebecca, is about his retirement article. And this is kind of a neat article. It's up here if anybody wants to read it. This is in 1991 in October, or it might have been September, but yeah, I think the date on it is September 29th, 1981. And his retirement date was a few days later, October of 91. But it's kind of an interesting article about his career, and I guess the thing I'm proudest about my dad is just no college degree, starting at the very bottom of the company in a manufacturing process company that there's a lot of engineers. Most of the CEOs of these companies are engineers, because think about it, you know, there's a lot of technical stuff, and even being a buyer for, you're buying compressors, you're buying wiring. I mean, my dad didn't have any of that training being a purchasing agent. And so he learned a lot about all those things and worked his way to the top of that company without an engineering degree. And it's kind of an amazing story. I'm a little biased, of course. And one of the things that they talk about in that article is that this is a period of time where the baby boomers were in their 30s and 40s, kind of when my dad took over, like in the 80s. And they were starting to buy houses for $80,000 and $90,000. That's what the article talked about. But they were putting $20,000 and $30,000 into their kitchens. And so Amana was kind of an upscale company. They sold a lot of products that were kind of fitting into that niche at that point. We'll go to the next slide. Pam, do you have anything to add on this?
What was your dad most proud about, Tim?
Oh, okay. He said this to me several times. The thing he was most proud about his whole career. Anybody have a guess on what he would have said? They never had a strike while he was CEO.
Oh.
And I've been told that he would, every week, he would make a point to walk around the factory. It's miles around that factory, right, Kathy? And he had a really good relationship with the workforce. And yeah.
Well, and when I worked in the western part of Iowa County where I taught, and a lot of the families I worked with were Amana employees in the Victor area. And they, everybody spoke that he treated everybody the same. If you were the entry-level person in the plant, or we have pictures of him meeting with presidents and governors, everyone was the same.
It was a big change of him walking around as opposed to George Bush walking around.
Well, there was, but they shared one thing, I think, because I worked there in the era when George was still the president, and he too knew everybody in the place, and you know, he was very, he was that way too, so they shared that ability. Even though George sometimes was a little more, scary, shall we say.
I think those of us that met George know exactly what you're talking about. Does anybody recognize the gentleman on the right side? This was the man of VIP, the man of VIP. We have one of the golf bags here signed by all the pro golfers. That's Ernie Banks.
Of course.
And Pam and Ernie hit it off really well. Every year that he would come to the VIP, I don't know, they had a special bond. I don't know what it was, but
Baseball.
Baseball. Such a baseball player.
he was a real gentleman.
Yes, very, very kind man. I was trying to, this was a famous
Lady
female
golfer,
golfer, and I
anybody
can't
know
find-
who the lady golfer is?
she's not in my group, so.
So that's the man of VIP
I
and
wonder how many people were involved with the VIP that are here.
Well, we did food booth.
Yeah.
Food booths, yeah.
Food.
I was there.
that was one of his really hard decisions too. He shared that with me several times. When they had to, there were a lot of other companies. George Forstner had started the VIP program, the CAP thing, and he knew Julius Boris, the professional golfer from Florida. And through the relationship of those two people, they got connected to all the pros and they started the VIP and it was just so successful. But the whole demographics of that golfing thing was changing and it was becoming so expensive to get these professional golfers in every year. And it was kind of like a benefit to all their dealers. They'd bring all the dealers in and they'd get to meet all these pros and they had, I know my dad said that was one of his really hardest decisions was having to economically decide to shut that down. They just couldn't afford it anymore. Yes, sir.
Question, what years did the VIP run? I know it went through 82 because I worked there in 82, but after that I got to know
I think this golf bag is like in the 80s. I don't know
Um,
exactly.
I think, well, we worked at 87, I think 87 or 88 was the last year.
Okay.
Yeah,
That sounds about right.
I had a program I did,
Okay, we'll go on to the next slide, I guess. Oh, and this was the Mana Hawkeye Classic. My dad was 6'2", and Bobby Hansen is 6'6". I don't, it looks like there's more than a 4-inch differential there. I don't know if it's just the angle or what. And Alex Meyer. And, but they were involved in the Mana Hawkeye Classic.
the men's and women's.
And ladies also. And Pam and I have some really favorite stories about Vivian Stringer. We really got, our family, through my dad, got to be kind of friends with Vivian. And Pam, would you relay this? Everybody knows who Vivian Stringer was, right?
Okay,
Would you relay the story about Vivian?
I think this was probably one of the last VIPs, and we're at the golf course clubhouse and having lunch, and it's just buffet. There's just people in and out, noise, crazy noise, big circle, round tables. So we're there eating, and with his mom and dad, and Vivian Stringer walks up because Henry's probably really most responsible or a man for what became the Iowa women's basketball program. Before
She's
Henry,
done okay for herself.
before nobody went to the ball games. And so we're sitting there eating, and up comes Vivian to talk to Henry. And it's like everybody at that table stopped. Put your silverware down, hands in your lap. It was like that total, we talk about the it factor. She had that it factor. It was just amazing. It's like I can remember that today, like it happened.
We were sitting there eating and just everybody, she walks up and everybody just puts their stuff down and just kind of looks at it. I mean, she had that.
Was she the coach?
Yeah, we
How
call
long
it
was
the
she
it
coach
factor.
for?
The women's basketball coach,
Yeah, I know.
How long?
How long?
Oh,
a long time.
Forever.
Yeah. Up until Lisa Bruder, I think.
No, there was.
No, there
somebody
was
else.
one in between, and then she was at Rutgers up until
Yeah.
last
Angie
year,
Lee
2
was
years
after.
ago.
She left when her child died.
Yeah.
Her husband.
Her husband.
But this is what replaced the VIP, these two basketball
That's right. That's right. We got it.
things, the men's and the women's.
We'll keep moving, Rebecca, I guess. We could talk a long time, I guess, if we really wanted to.
Oh.
This is my dad, with Tom Davis, the men's coach at Iowa for a long, long time. They were good friends. And my parents were very, very good friends with the Elliots and also with Hayden Fry. And one day my dad called me, this was in the 80s sometime, and he said, "Tim, what are you doing tomorrow?" I said, "Well, my schedule's a little bit open, and would you like to play golf with me tomorrow at the country club?" And he said, "The foursome is Hayden Fry, Bump Elliott, me and you.
I think I'm free.
So I went and played golf that day. It was fun.
I think Hayden's in the next picture.
Yeah, I think Hayden Fry might be in the next picture.
Oh, yeah.
This would have been,
This was in
Eight.
Florida.
oh, this is
Yeah.
in Florida, okay. Hayden Fry reception, probably 90s, I would say, vintage or something. Keep
Your
going,
mom looks
right?
really nice.
This is the bike trail in Amana. Henry was pretty involved in the bike trail. I think mom and dad gave 25,000 or something to kind of get it going. And we have a story, I've got a leadership story about my father as far as the bike trail. We worked on the bike trail for years, and it ran into some snags with the Mana Society Board. And all of a sudden, the land that we thought had been had an easement over to the bike trail, that was in limbo and wasn't gonna happen because of some changes on the board. And everybody, I was on the board, on the bike trail board, everybody just kind of like, we worked on this thing for 3 or 4 or 5 years, finally got this grant from the state, and now we can't do it because of some things we can't control. And everybody was just like in depression. And I just remember my dad's leadership. He'd been a CEO of a major company. He just kind of like nonchalantly, just kind of like, what am I trying to say, Pam? He basically, you could see he was so positive. He knew we were going to get it done. Just, don't worry about it. Just put your head down and keep pedaling, guys. And I just remember that leadership. Pam, you do too, don't you? Were you in those meetings? I mean,
I just remember Henry as being this larger than life person. It took me years before I could call him Henry. I was like, okay, Mr. Meyer, we're going into the football, basketball games together. Okay, Mr. Meyer. It took a long time.
and people would ask me all the time, well, why don't you go up and work for your dad? Why don't you go get, I think somebody said one time, why don't you go get some cushy job with your dad? I said, well, the first reason is he wouldn't hire me. Do we have to really go to the second reason? Well, I mean, he would have never, and it wouldn't have been good for me to work up there because I would have been in the shadow and I would have, I'm thankful. But anyway, we'll keep moving here.
Do you know who the people are in the picture? Yep, some of them. We go back to some of those people.
Lanny Holiday, Mike Shute,
Henry, Mildred.
Margaret Stamen behind my mom.
This was at the groundbreaking, and I don't know the young family on the right.
But I think that's Margaret's daughter.
Oh, sure.
Oh,
Statement.
okay,
Yeah,
Rachel.
that's Rachel. But who's
Yeah.
the man with the? Do you know who the man is next to Mike Shute?
No, I don't.
I was thinking that was Peter.
Oh,
Is that not Peter Hingley?
Peter Hingley?
No.
Okay, then.
This
No.
might be the man with the
Iowa Natural
by-
Heritage.
yeah.
natural heritage that
Because-
was the.
Okay.
We work with the Iowa Natural Heritage.
He's got a camera too. He's a little more dressed up.
Okay, go to next slide, please. Okay, then when they retired in 91, their goal was to build a house next to Betsy. You weren't there yet,
No.
but their house that's now next to Betsy that somebody else lives in, but, so they were really proud of that home. And then the house on the right was their home in Florida. And they were so lucky, they got to spend 20 years of their life in retirement in Florida. Together.
That's what they love, together.
I mean, how lucky can you be? And I always think that Pam and I have talked about this a lot, being in that warm climate, for the cold months of the year where you could be outside and be active, it really kind of extended their life. We'll keep moving here. This was the 70th,
Yeah.
70th wedding anniversary, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
At the Oxyoke. I did the actuarial statistics on the chances of getting to 70 in marriage. It's
There
not,
aren't any.
It's so,
it's not real high.
No.
This was at Sydney's funeral at the Oxyoke. And Sydney passed away in December of 2019. We're not sure what she died of. She was found at home actually through a page, did a welfare call or something. We'll keep going.
Yeah, family was really important to Henry. All the Ackerman cousins and doubles and, yeah.
Okay, we're gonna switch over to briefly a little bit about Tim's career. This is the highlight of I started out as an insurance person here in Amana. I started coaching and teaching, and then when I was 25, I decided that wasn't my calling in life, and I needed to do something different. And it was really a blessing in disguise. And actually, Janet's husband, Carol, hired me for Equitable of Iowa in 1973, and I was teaching part-time. I taught in the morning, and then I was doing that in the afternoon. And this is kind of the proudest moment of my career, because the picture at the top is at Keystone, Colorado, and that night they flew my parents in to Keystone because I received what's called the Hall of Honor Award, which was given to one rep per year. It was kind of a lifetime achievement award type thing, and I was really proud that they flew my parents out.
And Jim didn't know they were coming.
Oh.
It was,
Oh, wow.
it was a big surprise. I knew, and I had to sit in the car. And I'm not very good at that kind of stuff.
And we found out that we were shopping in Silverthorne, right down from Keystone, if you've ever been to Keystone. And they were shopping there the same time we were, the same day. We didn't run into each other. That's a little bit about that part of my
How old
career.
were you, Tim, when you got your award?
49. And the interesting, I'll just talk a second about that. When they did when I was still teaching and they did the psychometric profile on me
Yes.
to whether or not I could survive in the insurance business,
Uh-huh.
Carol and Jim Lure sat me down and said, Tim, everything in your psychometric profile says that you're not going to last 6 months. They pretty much put that down right in front of me. That's real encouraging.
Proven otherwise,
So
right?
then 23 years later, I got the Hall of Honor Award, which historically, there were 50 people in that whole company that ever got that award. And I'll just read it to you. The Hall of Honor is the most prestigious award that Equitable of Iowa representative can attain. It's a once in a lifetime. It's presented to one field associate and recognizes character, professional ability, company and industry achievements, and ethical, I was kind of proud when after, they told me I wasn't going to make it.
And you lasted a few years after that.
You did.
Yeah. One thing too, it's kind of interesting. My dad worked for the same company for 45 years to the day. Pam taught school, kindergarten in one school for 40 years, one school. I worked for the same company for 41 years.
Wow.
I mean, talk about actuarial odds of 3 people in
Who
today's.
must not like change?
No.
I guess you could interpret that we didn't like any change. Keep going. And then Pam's father, who ran the newspaper in Wellman, decided when he was 55 years old, 55, cold turkey, that he was going to bike across the state of Iowa. And he started a kind of a tradition. He's about this tall, Pam, right? Strong person, but just sheer determination.
Yeah, it was a dare. My brother-in-law gave him a bike at Christmas, said, I dare you to do this. Oh, he did it.
And Pam just lost her brother, who'd been very ill with a stroke last week.
A few days ago.
But Pam did 32 full rag rides.
Wow.
I was kind of a slacker, I only did 30. These are some pictures. These are Pam's at the top. Pam's two nieces.
Oh, my nieces. Almost everybody in my family went at one time or another with. Jim and I are the only ones that kept doing it. Again, one time.
I always thought too, and I've said this a couple times to people, that I think it really helped my career to do rag ride because just the discipline that you bike 600, they say you need to bike at least 500 miles to do a good rag ride, and I just think it helps kind of create a little discipline. We both have talked about that in our lives, and it's 7 days biking across Iowa. We figured out that we spent about 200 nights either sleeping in a tent or sleeping in a camper on rag ride. And the really hard days of rag ride are usually Thursday, Friday, because you're tired. The first couple of days, you're all psyched up and rested. But that's dipping our tires, the bottom picture, I think in Davenport. I think LeClaire is across the river there, but we'll keep moving here.
But we had a really good support team.
Oh, yeah.
We had the best rag ride driver ever, Judy.
Peggy's sister,
Leslie's
Judy,
sister. Oh, yes.
was our driver
Oh,
for about 10 years or more. And of course, there's a few stories that.
She was so good.
This is my one claim to fame. In high school, I played baseball and basketball, and then I went to college, and I was determined to be a college athlete. But being a 150-pound catcher and having an all-conference catcher where I went to school at Central, I didn't get to play right away, and then they recruited my sophomore, junior year, they recruited an All-American catcher, so I had to sit on the bench for 3 years, but finally, my last year at Central, I got to play, and for me, I think I learned more in college athletics than I did in the classroom, and you just learn. In the career that I went into, which was kind of like self-motivation and discipline and those kinds of things, but I hit 2 college home runs and one of them made the Des Moines Register.
wow.
And I had to stick my tongue out, and the highlight is Taste of Victory. So we'll keep moving here. And just in October, I received an award as an outstanding tree farmer of the year for Iowa, which was kind of surprising because there's 1,000 tree farmers in the state of Iowa. And really, my 2 foresters, the guy on the left is my state district forester, Ray Lane, who is really the reason I probably got this award. And then on the right side is Bob Petrozelko, who's our private forestry consultant. But we started buying some timberland in southern Iowa, and then just there's a lot of incentives in the state with like REAP programs and financial incentives to improve your forests, and so it's something, there's a tree farmer sign over there, and this is the plaque.
Yeah. What kind of trees mostly?
We have mostly like an oak timber. And I need to get out to Dennis's timber. We've talked about it. He's been down to our property several times, but it's just one of those awards, honestly, that if you just hang around long enough, you get it. But, so I don't know if were there more slides, ma'am?
I don't know. No, that's it.
That's it. So, and here's my
Oh.
catcher's mitt from growing up.
Tell us about where you got it. Who had it?
I don't remember who had it. Oh, Alan Baumgartner
Oh,
had
Alan.
it. Somehow he got a hold of it. You know what? Did you play with Alan Neubauer?
Yeah.
Okay, he was a really good pitcher, right? When I was just like 7 years, he was like right up the street from me. He wanted me to warm him up. He threw hard.
Yeah.
And I was catching him with this thing. That was like self-defense. I mean, these guys didn't get killed, you know. There's not a lot of defense there in front of you.
You can't squeeze it.
Yeah.
Well, anybody have any questions or comments? Or, I don't know, that's kind of what we decided to put together.
That's that Penny,
Oh,
Yeah.
that's,
oh, yes. If you go to the ox yoke, you'll see one of these for the Leichnering family. Here. When you go into the ox yoke and past the desk to the left, is that gonna fall off of there? But when my dad retired, they did this. Richard Penny, I think, he's from Cedar Rapids. He does this kind of stuff for, I think it's like $5,000 to do these. And that was way back then. But, you know, they individualize it to your family. You know, he worked at Amana. This is the old house. Hawkeye fan. This is the symbol of their golf course in Florida, Old Hickory.
What's the bowling pin?
He had the highest bowling at the Ringo Bowling Lane 1 year, or series. Pretty impressive. He was on the school board, Sunday school stuff, date of birth. They owned several farms. He liked to bike. Pam has a story. Tell them a story about going up to Sparta with my folks.
there's a bike trail in Wisconsin, the Sparta Trail. It's 32 miles one way, and it's limestone. And so one weekend we asked Henry and Mildred to go with us. And Tim and I were doing a lot of biking at that time, and Henry and Mildred weren't. So they get on their bikes and take off. It's 32 miles. Starts to rain. And rain and cold. They keep going. I turn around and I go back and get the truck to meet them at the other end. So here are Henry and Mildred, who haven't biked probably that long since they were maybe ever. Did that bike ride with us and all the way.
Wow.
Did they have a flashlight?
What?
Did they have a flashlight?
I
Hey,
don't know.
Tim, I have a question about, when your dad was in Amana Refrigeration, so when did they move the microwave division out? Was that during his tenure? Because that moved to Fayetteville then, right?
Yeah.
That was the heating and cooling.
The heating and cooling.
Yeah, Kathy Bryan was.
Okay, heating and cooling, thank you. I didn't know, okay.
They had to build, later in my dad's career, he became the Raytheon appliance executive. He not only had Amana, but he had Caloric and Speed Queen and whatever else they had. And they wanted him to move to Lexington, Massachusetts. He went there all the time, and they had a corporate jet, and he would fly all the time to Lexington, Boston area, because that's where Raytheon was. But they wanted him to move out there, but I think they wanted to mandate that he move out there, but he was in a good enough position that they didn't want to lose him, and they left him here in Amana, but he didn't want to move from Iowa to Boston. And part of the reason he left, he retired when he did, was because he retired when he was 64. He was going to work till he was 65, but Tom Phillips, who was the old CEO, who my dad got along with just wonderful, he retired, and then a new guy came in, and totally different mindset. And I think I can probably say this now because the statute of limitations. You know, I remember my dad telling me he wanted him to cook the books a few times. Like, in other words, Raytheon expected a little better performance out of Amana. So why don't you move a couple numbers so that the July 1991 number looks a little bit better on the Raytheon report? Well, now you can't do that because of Oxley. There's a law that says if you do that, you go to jail if you're CEO. But my dad didn't want anything to do with that. He was in a financial position to say, I don't need to do that. And I'm gonna retire next year anyway, I'll just retire now, so. Anyway. Thanks for coming and.
Tim, when did you start your business here in Amana, and then you sold it
To Lisa?
I mean, was that a short time?
Well, I started in the insurance business. That whole business world, when I started, it was the insurance business. Now it's the financial services business. It really transitioned from life insurance to investments. And I was in the middle of that. But I started in '73, and then I moved out here, had an office in John Wagner's building for a while. Do you remember that, RC? I was in John Wagner's building for a while, and then moved to Lisa's current position. One of the things I'm really pleased with too is that our business is still going. You know, and there's so many times, like, I have so many peers that sold to somebody and they just don't have the moxie, or they don't have the clients or whatever. And it's kind of like Les and Linda, you know, they're Ackerman winery that still going. You know, that's neat when you see that continuity of that business. And I just.
So how long were you up at the pharmacy building, the doctor's office? When did the doctor's?
We moved out in '99.
That's when she moved in. 'Cause all the stuff was still
Okay.
It's still there. Yeah, I'm sure.
So I was there from '99 till
14.
2014 when I retired, so 15 years there. But I officed in Iowa City, but we always worked a lot with farmers. We had a lot of farm clients, and I have this note at home that I was going to bring along from my mom. I was going to share this with you too, that my parents were in nursing homes for 5.5 years. My dad was in for about 3, and then my mom lived it. And that was really kind of a fulfilling part of Pam's and my life, because we were both retired, and we spent quite a bit of time. Les and Linda know this, and I want to give a shout out to Les and Linda too, because you guys absolutely made my mom's life a lot better. You really did. She looked forward every Sunday after church. Those guys showed up, and she looked so forward to them, Linda, to you guys being there. And
We loved him.
appreciate you coming. Hope it's interesting. A lot of man.
The one thing I was going to say really quickly is, I mean, again, as we've talked today, there's all the different, you know, you had Alan pitch to you, and there's, you know, the people who lived in the houses and all the different connections. All of us who worked at the plant at one time. My clock number was 4013, and I can tell you, John, I'm pretty sure it was 92 into 93 when they closed the radar range line down. That was starting to happen right when I got hired. But the one thing I always think about Henry was when I was a little kid, and yeah, being 6'2" and I'm this big, my mom dropped me off at Sunday school in the basement of the church, and if you remember walking in down there, there were 2 ways to get into like the little saal area like this. And my mom would say, now you go in and sit down, and I'm just going to sit on the bench out here. I'm just going to be sitting here when you're done, so don't be scared. And, you know, and I was always, I don't know if it's an anxiety thing or not, but I would walk in and I would sit down, and Henry would be there, and he would look at me and say, "Good morning, John," with that voice, and you know, "Good morning, Mr. Meyer." And so then after Sunday school, we'd all go out and shake hands. You know, Shirley was a Sunday school teacher. We'd all shake their hands. My mother would sit there. She kind of programmed me for like maybe the first couple of months. After that, she wasn't there anymore. But then I got more used to Henry being there, and I just remember that little, you know, it was a little space about this big, and so it's always really neat. Then when I got older, and when Wayne came to live in Amana, even though Henry and Mildred knew we were probably up to no good, they were always super loving when our friends would go over to their house and we'd pick up Wayne and we'd, you know, go out for the night or whatever. They said, "Be careful, be safe, be home on time," you know, or whatever. So just have a lot of memories of it.
We were talking about, I don't remember my dad ever raising his voice. I mean,
No. Your dad was always such a kind man. I remember him at church all the time on the men's side.
Yeah.
And he would he always felt like he went out of his way to talk to me. You know, I mean, he was just always very kind.
At his funeral, my dad died of COVID. He fell at the nursing home and ended up in St. Luke's Hospital for 3 days. And while he was in St. Luke's, this was not December, it was 2020 sometime, like early in the year. Caught COVID while he was in St. Luke's and went back to the gardens. And this was when you couldn't go into the nursing home. My dad had dementia at that point. And we had to go, they had an outside window, this is funny, and they wouldn't let us in the nursing home. So we'd have to go to the window. Linda, you guys remember that with Mom too. And we'd knock it on the window and he was sitting there and he'd come to the window and we'd try to sneak it open a little bit if we could, but he says, come on in, come on in.
Why are you out there?
Come on in.
You know, and Tim, did you mention, I don't know, anybody who doesn't know them real well, that it was a brother-sister marriage? That it was brothers married sisters and sisters married brothers. I always thought that was just the most when I put that together as a kid, I think Mildred told me that after they moved, I hadn't known that. I just was like, oh my goodness, that's amazing.
Les and I, we talk about the double cousins and we talk about kind of the difference sometimes of the Meyer family and the Ackerman family, and both of the strengths of, they each have so many strengths, but they're kind of different.
Yeah.
You know, one's a little bit more laid back, one's a little bit, like my mom's side, a little bit more aggressive, you know, or whatever you want to call it.
Oh, that's right, because you're double cousins, aren't you? Oh, yeah. Yeah, Samantha. Right, you're not triple cousins.
Anybody have any questions about anything? When I called my dad's secretary of 30 years, Marion Rachi, and asked her if she wanted to make a comment about this, and she said he was just a very gentle man. It's kind of a nice thing to say about someone. But he was also a good business person, and if he had to make a business decision that.
And a very good community member.
Yeah, very active.
Important to everybody.
He's very involved in the community. Yes.
But when he communicated a decision, it was communicated in a way that you knew there was no changing it. He was very calm, but he was always, he was definitive. I love that about him as an next door neighbor. He was always lovely.
You said to me one time, part of the reason that you and Tim are in Amana.
Yes. Tim's, the man of refrigeration took such, when he was there, took such a view of the community, he wanted to provide for the community too. And the Humane Society and Henry approached Tim. And really, Tim wasn't going to come. My husband was not going to come until Henry talked to him. And because of how wonderful a man he was, how calm, how kind and ethical, he's like, I think we should do this. And so we did, and the rest is history. They were very good to us.
That was a good thing that he did.
Yes, he did a lot of those. A lot of those under the radar, I think people didn't know about. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Please feel free to stick around for some more sugar and coffee if we have some. And don't forget to submit your story for this next year.
Well, he does. Just wonderful.
Oh, bye. Yeah, I would actually rather do it on Sunday. But then